नमस्कार दर्शकों, बिजनेस फोर्टनाइट में आपका पुनः स्वागत है। और आज हम एक मैनेजमेंट से जुड़े हुए इंटरेस्टिंग टॉपिक पर आपसे चर्चा करने जा रहे हैं। और यह टॉपिक आपने अक्सर सुना होगा, जो कि आपको उसकी शब्दावली शायद आपको सुनने में आई होगी। अक्सर आप न्यूज़ में देखते होंगे कि फलां कंपनी का ऑपरेशनल एफिशिएंसी की वजह से बहुत अच्छा परफॉर्मेंस रहा, फलां कंपनी ऑपरेशनल परफॉर्मेंस ख़राब रहने की वजह से काफ़ी घाटे में चली गई। तो ये ऑपरेशनल परफॉर्मेंस क्या होता है और इसके पीछे बहुत सारे जो तत्व जुड़े हुए थे। मान लीजिए कोई भी कंपनी सक्सेस अचीव करती है, तो उस सक्सेस के पीछे उसके मैन, मशीन, प्रोसेस, सिस्टम्स, टेक्नोलॉजी, ऐसे बहुत सारे एलिमेंट्स होते हैं जो उसको एक कंप्लीट सक्सेस की ओर लेके जाते हैं। तो ऑपरेशनल सक्सेसफुल कैसे रहता है, ऑपरेशनल एफिशिएंसी के बारे में बहुत सारे लोगों की जिज्ञासाएं होती हैं कि ये किस तरह से अचीव की जाती है। तो आज इसके लिए हमारे साथ बहुत अच्छे एक एक्सपर्ट जुड़े हुए हैं, जो कि काफ़ी लंबा अनुभव रखते हैं मैनेजमेंट के क्षेत्र में, और वो एक साथ ही मोटिवेशनल स्पीकर भी हैं। काफ़ी सारी कंपनियों को वो ट्रेनिंग भी देने जाते हैं और बहुत सारे लोग उनसे मैनेजमेंट संबंधी अपनी समस्याओं का समाधान पाते हैं। तो आज हम चर्चा करने जा रहे हैं मिस्टर लाजपत श्रीवास्तव जी से, जो कि इस फील्ड में बहुत लंबा अनुभव, करीब 4 दशक के आसपास का अनुभव रखते हैं। तो लाजपत जी, आपका बहुत बहुत स्वागत है।
Thank you so much, Sonyaji. Thank you. It's really, I appreciate the opportunity to have this live dialogue with you, because this is one of the areas which has suddenly acquired significant importance in the country, because there are lots of industries which are, struggling to survive and sustain their operations. So please go ahead. Yes, thank you.
ओके, फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल लाजपत जी, हम जानना चाहेंगे कि व्हाट इज़ ऑपरेशनल परफॉर्मेंस और ऑपरेशनल एफिशिएंसी। तो ये बेसिकली लोगों को थोड़ा अगर लेमन की लैंग्वेज में आप समझा पाएँ तो थोड़ा आसान होगा।
ठीक है। I think, Sariji, if you allow me, I would actually like to take a step back and explain what does it mean, a company becoming distressed or sick. How do we define it? So just if, two, three statements on that. Typically, companies in the past, before the insolvency and bankruptcy code was implemented by the government of India in 2016, November 2016, it was very vague. Which company you will call it as sick, distress, etc., etc. It was very vague, and it got defined only after that, where if a company consistently fails to achieve the target performance and fails to meet the debt repayment obligations. Debt repayments meaning, the bank से जो आपने लोन लिया है उसके जो installments आप pay करते हैं along with interest. So the moment you start failing to pay the interest and the installments, the banks have the right to immediately call that industry distressed. And if this happens, if a bank calls you as a distressed asset or a distressed company, then what happens is that they immediately take over the company for operations, and the management is stripped of their, the management, the authority, and a resolution professional gets appointed in that company to manage the operations of that company. The entire staff of the company remains the same, but it reports to the new guy that is resolution professional, and he runs the day-to-day operations of the company and then tries to revive that company in the manner that we are going to talk about. So that just defines, what we are going to talk about. And so coming to this operational efficiency, I think this operational efficiency basically consists of several things, and I would take you through. So the fundamental to the operational efficiency is the performance of the asset itself. The plant that is producing your product, or the plant which is producing your, sometimes, it could be a commodity, sometimes it could be electricity, sometimes it could be something else. So it is the plant's performance which is according to the industry norms and standards, if it is achieving or not. That is the first and the foremost when you talk about operational efficiency. Performance of key management staff and operational staff in achieving all these, desired and the set targets. Third is constantly meeting the governance requirements, statutory, non-statutory, and formulating a policy of, what would be constituted as acceptable and what would be constituted as non-acceptable. I will just give an example for, if you look at Tata Group. I have worked with Tata Group. I found that in Tata Group, many of the typically accepted norms of the industry, where you say that, you know if it's a small price that you have to pay it and get things done faster. In order to save time, you would not mind spending some money. But in Tata Group, this was a strictly no. For example, they would say, if it's going to take 1 week, let it take 1 week, but you're not going to spend anything to, and typically, every employee was held accountable for decisions he was taking, both in terms of honesty, integrity, in terms of the interest of the company. So if something was found later, particularly key stuff, something was later found that this decision which was taken has caused some loss or some difficulty for the company, that employee will be answerable for it. Implementation of standard operating procedures. You must have heard the word SOPs. So, company must have SOPs. Many companies operate without SOPs. So, company must have SOPs, and these SOPs must be strictly implemented with no, deviations, and there must be a proper set of, norms. If there are any deviations, what would be the procedure followed to get that deviation approved? um, Ensuring that key management staff is always kept up to date in terms of training needs, in terms of keeping themselves technologically up to date, etc. So that needs to be constantly reviewed, and if there are necessary steps to be taken for training them, or exposing them to the new environment, that must be done. Implementation of industry best practices. Best practices, I would explain, in power sector, for example, which has been my core sector. You have norms which are called specific oil consumption. So when you do this lubrication oil, etc., etc., there are set norms that if your plant is not achieving those standard norms, then you are bleeding the revenue, because if you're consuming excess, then you're bleeding the revenue. So there are industry best practices that needs to be implemented. And also in the same way, the um employee health and safety, which is very, very critical to any industry, because as you know, if there is any accident, it immediately results into loss of, you know uh, production, loss of generation for several hours, sometimes several days.
Even the revenue.
Yes.
Even the revenue.
Yes. And the last but not the least, and I want to emphasize on this point, that in the recent past, if you look at the industries, the economic uh, up and down turns, Mr. Soni, you must have seen that it's a nature. In 2000 we had economic downturns, then industry got revived, and again in recently 2008 onwards we are facing a downturn. So this up and down is going to continue. It's not something new. But in spite of this economic up and down turns, you will find that there are industries like Tata Group, there are industries like Goenkas, there are a lot of KK Birla and other Birla Group companies and so on, which have survived, and they are still flourishing, they are still growing, they are still doing well. But you will find that there are industries which came up in the recent 10, 12 years, 15 years period. Suddenly they face difficulty, they start going down, they start becoming financially stressed, etc. So why I drew this example is because it brings to the focus that what is so different between these old standard companies versus the new companies. The old companies, because I've worked with Tatas, I have worked with Birla company, I have worked with Larsen Tubro, and I have also worked with the MB Power, which was my last edition where I was the chief executive. So what I found is that the focus on management of the money is very loose in the recent companies, whereas it was very strict in the old companies. If you have multiple businesses, then earnings, revenues, expenditure, everything related to one business would remain within that business and will not be diverted anywhere. Whereas today, if you find the money is entirely used by the promoters as they wish.
Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Actually, I would like to know, as so far you have mentioned larger groups or larger companies. So, is the operational strategies or the operational performance is anywhere related to some other, are applicable to some smaller industries as well?
No, I think operational efficiency, the kind of measurements that you have or the indicators that you have of operational efficiency, they apply to each and every type of industry and each and every size of industry. Because if you do not follow these golden rules, if I may call them golden rules, then sooner or later, you will get into problems, and that problem, once you get into a problem, then it only magnifies. It doesn't go away easily. So it applies to these operational efficiency parameters, and the steps that I have talked about, they apply to each and every type of industry and also size of industry. Actually, this the steps and methodology, while broad steps would remain the same as we have talked about, like reviewing the plant performance, what are the industry benchmarks related to it, and whether the plant particularly is performing as per those standards or not. They are all, there are standard broad steps. But then when it comes to its implementation, the implementation differs in each type of industry. For example, if it's a chemical industry where you're producing petroleum products and it's a processed plant, which is, where you're producing monoethylene glycol or other fertilizers or something else, it may involve different types of monitoring, different types of complicated nature. Whereas if it's a product based company where you're making toothpaste or you're making something else, it may be slightly different. But and also it becomes much more complicated when it becomes a contracting type business. So for example, if a company is doing construction business and they have multiple contracts which they are handling at a given time, then their revenue sources, their expenditures are all spread out in a number of buckets. So therefore, if a company becomes sick, you would find it very difficult to understand where did the revenue leak happen and why did the company become sick. So sometimes you may find that company, out of, let's say, first it was doing 20 contracts at a time, and it actually did well in 18, but just 2 contracts which were large value, and it did not do well, and the client charged you liquidated damages or the penalty for shortfall in performance, and then penalty was so huge that your profit which you earned from 18 projects is gone in 2 projects. So therefore, that kind of complexity comes in. But otherwise, the steps that are required to monitor the operational efficiency, they are all more or less well defined. So you will start with, for example, root cause analysis. What happened?
I was about to ask you what are the standard procedures and practices which applies to every industry.
All right. Okay. So I will explain few broad steps that happen, and from there we can understand. So broadly, the one starts from the let me take my yes. So broadly, it starts with root cause analysis, where one goes from, this root cause analysis is comprehensive. It covers the plant, and I will give you some live examples that I was doing a revival restructuring of a power plant about 2 years back, and I found that what was happening, that the owners were Marwaris, and what they had done, over the years, the profits that were getting made from the company, they were utilizing to develop other businesses, and they did not implement any of the routine maintenance of the plant. So if a part is failing or something else is happening, so it would not, like, as long as it's working, they would not go for doing any preventive maintenance. So plant started faltering, it started failing, and over a period of time its performance dropped. So it will start with root cause, which will be for the plant performance, for key management staff, and it includes things like not only the performance, but even the things like uh, their honesty, integrity, their management capability in terms of taking the decisions, and and their understanding of the job and role they are performing on a day-to-day basis, etc. So it's like key reviewing the key performance. Similarly, also looking at external environment, that are there any changes in the business environment. Sometimes, a product may have been a very profitable product and you were doing extremely well, but what happens that suddenly somebody came up with a new plant and he launched a similar product with a better specification, lesser cost, and it got accepted in the market. So your product's acceptability got reduced. Understood?
Right.
So therefore, what happens is that in such a scenario, for no fault of yours, suddenly you will find that your product is not selling as it was earlier selling, and therefore it is causing you to losses. So these type of things, it happens. Even the banks have recognized that this type of reasons, banks have a different way to deal with. Whereas if it's a reason which is completely responsibility of the promoter, and because of his fault it has happened, it's called willful default. And if it has happened because of external environments, the causes, I mean, the banks look at it differently, and they allow you to upgrade the plan to meet the technology challenges, and improve your products to meet the market requirements, so on and so forth. So root cause analysis, and then once you have the causes and you understand what's happening and where the problems are lying, then you prepare a detailed action plan. And then each and every action plan may relate to different departments, different segments of the corporate. So you go around implementing them, set a target, set a time frame, set standards which you will monitor. So over a period of time, you are able to achieve the performance, and you are able to bring this company back to normal, back to profit making. But sometimes it is difficult, because the losses that the company has incurred, which, what you must have heard the term called debt trap. Debt trap is like, you go on taking debt to pay interest, you go on take more debt to pay interest, and at a point of time, what you find that your interest has become so much that it is significantly higher than the income that you earn. So there is no way your income is sufficient to pay the interest or the debt. So that is called debt trap. And I think most companies, they make that mistake of falling in the debt trap. So these things you monitor, and if the debt trap has gone to such an extent that it's impossible to pay, then the other way we adopt is that you look at the company's different businesses. Sometimes companies get into businesses which are not aligned, in the sense that, if somebody was producing electrical switches, fittings, etc., and suddenly he starts producing some chemical. Now it is completely different product, it's nothing related to each other. So sometimes he may get into building roads, sometimes he may do BOT projects. So what you find, then the banks, what they do, they ask the resolution professional that any unrelated business which can be sold, and that money can be brought back into the main business of the promoter, then do it. And so, for example, I have done this in one business, which was a EPC company. I was asked to revive that company. I found that the promoter had taken out the money from business, and he had invested in several BOT projects on his personal name. So he was trying to create personal wealth at the cost of company. So we had to tell the banks that these assets have to be sold, and the money and the proceeds that we acquire from these assets can be set off against the debt, so that will reduce the burden on the company, and the interest and the debt payment will come back within the earnings of the company. So these are different ways in which you go around solving the problem, but steps broadly are these.
Okay. Okay, so you were talking about some golden rules. So can you please elaborate what are the golden rules to achieve optimum performance of a company or a team or a product or service?
So I think I would start with about a couple of steps. The first and foremost is that one should, right from the beginning, one should prepare standard operating procedures and the benchmark performance that one expects from a particular plant, and this will be driven by the industry norms. Understood? So that must be defined and set as a norm, which becomes the measure against which you check the actual performance of either employee or the plant. So SOPs and the industry related benchmark for performance of the plant and the employee, it must be done religiously with the involvement of the management, top management. Because if you leave it to employee, they would always set an example for themselves which is easily achievable. They may not set example which is as per the industry norm, which is stretched, which is difficult to achieve. So they will normally set it example which is easy to achieve. So top management's involvement is required, because subsequently throughout the plant operation, this is the benchmark that you will always measure up to. So that is one part. Second part is that it is very important that in the beginning of the company, the key management staff must be very, very carefully selected, because often you have the wrong man for the other jobs, and then he keeps messing around, and you think that something else is happening, but he's not the right guy for the job, and therefore you can't help it unless you replace him. So this is also has happened. I have seen these in the actual examples in the industry, because somebody was related to the promoters. He was forced on the company's payroll and actually they wanted to pay him. I told promoters, you company is yours, you can pay him by keeping him in some role which is cozy. You don't have to keep him in a critical role where he can actually make the company sick or profitable. So that is key performance, key management staff. Third is the constant review, regular review of monthly review, quarterly review of all these parameters which you have set for plant as well as for the individuals, and any shortcoming, any dips you observe, you must immediately go back and do root cause as to why is this happening and set it right, so that it doesn't accumulate and become so big that you can't handle it. Fourth is that employee health and safety. As I said, that you must focus on employee health and safety. In today's times, it has become much more important, because the norms have become very difficult. If you have an accident, you can, promoter sometimes can even be put behind bars. They're so difficult norms. So that is one. And so then coming to the financial control. So in order to be successful, one of the most significant aspect is the financial control and financial management. Typically, a new promoter, a new businessman, if he starts earning well, his plant starts performing well, and the money is flowing, everything is going well, he becomes a bit complacent, and then he thinks, oh, now I'm the Raja. And then what happens is that he starts, probably, I'm just guessing, sometimes people will start investing in a huge car, new bungalow, new house, this, that, and lifestyle changes. And what happens is that the money which is actually supposed to go into the plant or into the growth is getting used elsewhere. Now, somewhere or the other, the plant performance will suffer if the money becomes short in maintenance or in upkeep or in upgradation. So typically the money management, I have seen that, like example, I was in Tata Group. We had such a strict regulation that they had, for example, I was with Tata Power, they had almost 12 plants operating in the country. Each plant had its own profit and loss analysis, and each operational head of the plant was accountable for his own profit loss, for his own, so there was, if the money is diverted, it is only at the end when you have done your balance sheet and you find that you have made 100 crore profit, and this 100 crore profit belongs to the main corporate. That 100 crore profit, what will happen or what company will do with it, the top management may decide. But on a day-to-day basis, you're not allowed to meddle around with the funds that are flowing in. You have monthly, let's say a power company may have typically a 1,000 megawatt plant will generate 4,500 crores of revenue, every year. Now you just can't, every month you are getting a few hundred crores. You can't just go around using that hundreds of crores and into different areas which is not related to your plant. So these kind of things, and today with the corona teaching us a big lesson, optimization in cost. Same thing you can produce at 2x per unit, and same thing you can produce in x per unit. So if this 2x versus x, if you don't control, your profit will drop by that much percentage. Right. So this aspect plus your the I'm suddenly losing my thoughts. So the profitability aspects, then your plant performance, we have covered that. So these are some of the things that you will set standards in the beginning, and you will monitor them to ensure that they are being strictly implemented. Yes, I was just talking about that. Cash surplus today in the business, it has become very necessary to conserve cash. Most industries they just fritter away the earnings that they have. You must build on and keep lot of cash for emergency use.
Liquidity.
Emergency use means, sorry, say again.
Liquidity.
Yes, absolutely. So liquidity must be very strong, because unforeseen things have become so large. Earlier days business, if it is running well, if there is a competitor coming up, you would know much in advance, and you can plan, you can do things. But today, all of a sudden corona will come, all of a sudden industry recession will come, something else will happen. So suddenly you will find there are ups and downs for your industry, and if you're not very strong in liquidity, you may suffer, because a small amount of money can make your huge investment sick.
Okay. Sir, we are at the end of our discussion, and
Sure.
we would like to know what kind of suggestions you would give to the young entrepreneurs, those who are not operating, having their SOPs and system in process in place, and what do you suggest them to so that they can perform well and they don't fall into financial crisis?
Yes. So in this, Mr. Soni, I mean, I have conducted 2-3 conferences under the auspices of PhD chambers, and one under CII, and where almost the entire small and medium industry located in and around Bhopal, Mandideep, etc., people had come and attended. And subsequently, I think the couple of them which approached me for such helps, and I extended the help. I am basically retired and now settled in Bhopal. Before Corona started, I used to have consultancy engagements and I used to travel and do those things. But now I have discontinued because I do not want to travel. So I think basically they have to have, see, the involvement of promoter in any case would be essential, but they can engage experts who understand how an SOP is prepared, how the benchmark for industry is checked, and the plant performance, standards are set up. So then these things can be achieved, and similarly, uh, the SOPs. I mean, there are SOPs for even financial control, for example. So unless you prepare an annual budget for both performance of the plant as well as the budget. So if you're going to produce 1,000 crore worth of products, then what are the various raw materials required, cost required, employees required, etc., etc., how many hours the plant will operate, what will be the electricity consumption, blah blah blah. So you will prepare an annual budget which will come out with so many line items and detail out the cost that is going to be incurred over the year. Against that, you will prepare an annual earnings statement where how much money you're going to earn, and you will see the profitability, etc., etc. Now these things, once they are prepared for every year, and most companies, they do it on a forward looking basis. So it is not just one yearly, they will prepare such a thing for a 3-year rollout plan, and they will make changes into that 3-year rollout plan at every 1 year. So if there are any unforeseen things that has happened, they will take that into account, and they will revise the next 2 years one and add one more year into it. And these things are reviewed monthly, quarterly by the top management to see how is it happening? Are we meeting the performance? Are we meeting the targets? So that way, what happens is that you're always current in your actions. You're not deferring things. So if there is a problem, you would know it in your monthly review, and you will immediately get into the deeper of it, why it happened, what happened, and so on. You'll take corrective action. If you just sit back and relax that things are going well, then suddenly you may get into surprises.
Thank you
So
much,
I mean,
sir.
I am available. You have my contacts, and I mean, and I'm not very expensive resource, though I used to be very expensive resource, but now, because it's more of my intention to share my knowledge with the industry. So I mean, we can sit and talk with people who are needy, and even in terms of helping people to tide over problems with banks for financing, for example. So banks also, I mean, I enjoy a tremendous amount of respect for myself from banks, most of the banks, because the revival restructuring invariably involves banks. So I have worked with Axis, in ICICI, Punjab National, and SBI, and so on and so forth. So basically, I mean, they have to engage people who can help them to prepare such standards.
Thank you so much, sir, for your valuable information. I hope our
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I really enjoyed talking to you, and I hope this would be useful. And please share a copy of this with me.
sure, definitely.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.